Welcome to another episode of Doubl3Tap. Today we are joined by Wiancko, the CEO and founder of IronBelly Group. You guys have been doing a ton of stuff in the industry and now moving your attention over to Game Frame. Ryan, hey sir, how are you?
I am amazing, even more amazing to be here with you two fine folks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Before we get into the meat of it, disclaimers out the way. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not financial advice. The opinions shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may have investments in some of the companies or assets talked about throughout the show. That out the way, Ryan, what games are you currently playing?
So what I was thinking about this question coming back to the office, and I think the interesting question is like, why am I playing these games right now? Because that has changed a lot over my life. So I'm like big into Diablo 4 right now and Helldivers and New World. And I think part of me like a year ago just got out of this desire to have stressful, like high octane experiences and just have very relaxing experiences that I can like shut my brain off. And that's where Diablo, I was never a huge Diablo fan, and it just like fit that niche so well. But I guess like putting the question back to you guys in terms of maybe not necessarily what you're playing, but why do you think you guys are playing the games that you're playing right now versus games that you played 10 years ago?
I love that question, actually. I have a very rigid routine of playing the top grossing or like fastest climbing mobile games. And like with a specific focus on like Chinese only games. A lot of them are shit, but it's super interesting to kind of like try and deconstruct them. And then I play Baldur's Gate with the missus, and I play a ton of indies just to like relax.
Yeah, for me it's like flavor of the month. Sometimes I want to play competitive games, so like usually Valorant is my flavor of the month when I want to play that. I'll play League, like I'll play one game every like 3 to 4 months. I probably get an AFK or a feeder in the first game. I would say my hit rate is like 100% over the last 2 to 3 years. And then I just uninstall it. And I don't play that game for like 3 or 4 months. And then I play the nice and easy, relaxing games. So
League has been like an old friend that you just go back to.
It's an abusive relationship.
Yeah, it really is, dude. You got to get out of that shit.
Yeah, I try. I uninstall it.
Yeah, that's true. I have a couple games like that. I was like that with PlanetSide 2, and you realize like I'm not playing this to have fun anymore. This is kind of just like a drug habit at the end of it.
All right. Well, getting into things, I think it would be helpful for the audience, seeing as IronBelly, the group, has had many fingers in many pies. It would be good to give like a brief high level kind of rundown of where you guys have come from and where you're at today.
So I've been running companies for coming up on like a quarter century this year. I started in telecommunications and online billing way back in the day, but it was always the goal to get into games. So when my first company kind of hit it big, we just put aside a ton of our profits to try to make our own games. And back then we were trying to make our own game engine and make our own games at the same time. And did that for a while, and then kind of put that on the side as we realized like making our own engine and our own game was a task that was far beyond our capabilities. And then came back to it in around 2008, 2009, as we started working with UDK at the time, which was the kind of the free version of Unreal, to build our own game, and started getting a lot of attention for the work that we were doing. And people just kept on coming back to us and saying like, could you do some of this for our game and we'll pay you? And as, you know, starving artists, we all agreed. So we started doing more and more kind of contract work on the side. And we were doing more work with people that were building games very similar to ours. And it kind of really shone a spotlight in my eyes that we're all pulling from the same well of creativity. And we realized our superpower was really on execution. And so we started the whole shift away from being an indie studio to being a co-development house, well, just being mainly an art house, leading into co-development organically. And that went on for like 4 or 5 years before, to your point, I just started seeing this huge inefficiency, which was we were getting paid a lot of money to build the same thing over and over and over again. And I think like 1 month we had 3 separate clients come to us and ask for the weapons library from Battlefield or Call of Duty or Counter-Strike, whatever it was. And what I did is I went to all 3 of those clients and said, like, you're all asking for literally the exact same thing, same reference material, same everything. But because of the way proprietaryship works, we'd have to charge them each $3,000 a gun for 50 guns or whatever it was. And I was just like, this is so dumb. Why don't I just charge you all a third and then slice that in half? And we'll give you the guns, and then we'll keep the guns, and then we'll just start selling them to other people for $50 or $60 a gun or whatever it ends up being. And that was kind of before the Unreal Marketplace. And we were actually one of the first people to launch anything on the Unreal Marketplace. And then from there, it ballooned out to tons and tons of guns, tons of other things. And at this point, I think most indie shooters have launched with our guns. PUBG launched with our guns. And we started looking at the underlying systems that powered those weapons, because we had the same thing happening on the codev side, where they wanted a great weapon controller or a great camera controller. And the same thing started happening. So we started going to these clients and saying, like, we'll cut you a deal, but we want to retain all of the rights to the technology. We'll give you a license for the rest of your lives to do whatever you want with this system that we're building for you. And we started building this ever-growing library of systems, from camera controllers to weapon controllers to ballistics to locomotion, like you name it. Every system you need for Diablo, all the way to shrapnel. And about a year and a half ago or so, we reached this inflection point where we said, we have this critical mass of systems. Let's stop kind of offering it as a co-dev offering, and let's turn it into a product and start licensing it. And that's about the time that I met Mark Long over at Shrapnel. And they came to us looking for a co-dev partner. And I said to them, like, we could help you build your game from scratch, or we could start you on third base with this framework. And that's how that relationship started. That's how we kind of started building Shrapnel on top of our technology. And since then, a few other big names have licensed the tech, which we can't really announce right now. And we've really pivoted away from that co-dev play, which was under IronBelly Studios, towards more of a software as a service kind of platform play with GameFrame under IronBelly Group.
And just to real quick, Jack, just to add additional color for listeners in terms of the systems that you're kind of describing here, could you give like a couple of examples in the context of maybe a specific genre, just so people can kind of ground it?
Sure. Yeah. So I think at this point, there's something like 55, 60 systems in total. You look at something like a weapon controller, and that has like dozens of subsystems within it, things that control things like recoil and everything like that. So like a weapons controller, or locomotion, or ballistics, or enemy AI, or data persistence, or crafting, or construction, or like everything from a survival MMO, a Diablo, all the way up to an extraction shooter. And that's the crazy thing. And I think this is why our technology resonates more with experienced game executives. It's because they know what goes into building a Rust, or what goes into building a Call of Duty. They know that, like, for a weapon to behave the way it does in Battlefield, there's like 97 variables that have to be tuned just to get that weapon to behave a specific way when you shoot it. And our system handles all of that, because we've been working with some of the top AAA shooter designers in the world and making our system, excel for what they need. But yeah, those are some examples, but the list just goes on and on and on.
So the wider gaming industry is obviously struggling a little bit right now with crazy budgets, and distribution is more competitive than ever before. And so this has always been a thing, but I think now more than ever, the decision to buy versus build is kind of in favor of like smaller studios. And that's kind of where you guys are perfectly positioned. And so I'm curious, with GameFrame now coming out, how do you see this evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your kind of what you're alluding to, like this buy versus build becomes a survival technique for studios, small and especially large at the end of the day. And so I think what excites me a lot about GameFrame is that it really levels the playing field in both directions. So you're going to have larger studios being less and less willing to take big risks and make big bets on innovation, because nobody wants to risk that with a $200 million budget. And you're going to have these smaller studios that are going to be out innovating, but getting crushed in terms of content and quality because they just can't outspend the larger studios. And when you take the kind of the most central cost and use of time and resources, which is all of the gameplay systems, I mean, outside of content and whatnot, all of the gameplay systems, you take that out of the equation in terms of cost and time and cost, then you start freeing up the ability for larger studios to innovate a lot more because they have all of these systems out of the box ready to go. And the smaller studios can start pumping up content and quality because they're not spending 80% of their engineering budget on reinventing that wheel each and every time. And so where I see this going, particularly on the gameplay side, because that's where our focus is it becomes a survival technique. What we're going to see this evolve to is that these studios themselves are going to just become more and more narrowly focused on the thing that's going to make their game stand out, the thing that's going to innovate over the competition, and the thing that's going to give them better market fit.
Yeah, I think it's actually a great time to be in indie. And like over the next couple of years, it's going to be awesome. Like you said, there's a ton of back-end service providers that kind of will take care of server orchestration all the way up to like multiplayer modules, multiplayer services. And now you guys are kind of serving on the gameplay level.
Even like going deep into like live ops as well, with companies like Beamable, going into wallet analytics with companies like there's so many niches that are being covered out of the box that not only do you get your bases covered, but you get to level up so much more than you ever would because you don't have to build any of this stuff anymore. And I think that's great. And I think in terms of why it's great to be an indie right now is because players, we had that arms race of fidelity and scope at the beginning of the century. And I think players care so much less about which game looks better, which game has better insert whatever visual you want, and they're looking for games that are going to give them a unique and novel experience.
I want to go one level deeper into GameFrame and just kind of get some clarity around, is GameFrame going to be a gameplay engine layer for multiple genres, or do you guys kind of stick to your own lane and just do one thing really, really well?
Yeah, no. So GameFrame has been used to develop 6 Web 2 games. Shrapnel is built on it, so one of the biggest games in Web 3, and then another unannounced Web 3 game that is also a shooter but has more of an online component to it. And over the course of those now 9 or 10 titles, they've really run the gambit from, I mean, they all have like a shooter component to them in the sense that there are guns that shoot. But some of them are going to be large online survival games that have in-depth crafting and construction systems and offline persistence components. Others will be more just competitive shooters. It's been used in esports training simulators, but the components are there to build everything from a Diablo-style action RPG all the way up to a competitive extraction shooter and everything in between. So in terms of where we're sticking to our own lane right now, it's very action-oriented games, and it's games built on Unreal.
So could you maybe talk a little bit, like, is GameFrame exclusively kind of, does it exclusively live in kind of like the game development, like traditional gaming sort of space, or is there like Web3 kind of implementations that are that exist within GameFrame, or is it more you can plug and play with Web3 systems, like when you connect Beamable, then you get access to, maybe can you talk a little bit about like a little bit more of like a mechanical level, how it plugs into maybe the crypto stack and whatever way?
Yeah, so there's going to be native Web3 integrations, Beamable being a great example. Sui and all of our friends over at Miston have been very supportive of what we do. So we're looking at in the initial offering of probably 5 or 6 native integrations into Web3 services. I've listed a couple of them here, but at the end of the day, I think where blockchain gets really interesting for me, it is exposing the value chain of products and ecosystems in a completely transparent and trustless way. So every single thing and person that contributes into that value chain can have their contribution tracked and can be rewarded for that contribution throughout the life cycle of that entire ecosystem. And that's where I see this really going, and where Web3 is going to take a technology like this to the next level. If when we look at the Unreal Engine and game frame stacked on top of each other, we're looking at essentially like 90+% of the code for any game being centralized and standardized. And when you start looking at dozens or hundreds of games that have that level of standardization, you start approaching, parity with what we're looking at with internet websites, as an example. And that's where this term that I call the Internet of Games comes from, of currently in PC console games and even mobile to a certain extent, it's almost like every single game forces you to download your own internet browser to play that game. And then when you click on a link, you have to go and download another browser to play that game. But we did away with that when we completely standardized everything around the HTML standard. And we want to do that with games, particularly on the PC console side of things, and mobile to a lesser extent, where 90+% of the tech stack is standardized and uniform across these games. And so all you're really doing is changing the configuration and the content layer on top. And all of that can be streamed in. And that opens a door that opens the door to what starts to look like a decentralized metaverse, in a way, where you have games that players can access from other games as seamlessly as they would accessing websites from other websites. And I think once you combine that with Web3 technologies, where as those players contribute value in each of those ecosystems, as developers create value in each of those ecosystems, the contributors start being able to be rewarded. You start being able to do proper attribution. You start being able to do all of the things to take advantage of that free flowing movement of players from product to product, game to game, just like you would from website to website.
I probably should have asked this like much earlier in the conversation. And to go back to your point, I think as with all of these like backend services or developer tools that kind of democratize game development,
right.
It's like a
Great
bit
word.
of a double-edged sword, where you allow people who had never had the opportunity or were able to build games before to now be able to build games. You also allow teams to like be more lean and focus on the fun.
Sure.
But at the same time, you get like a ton more people building games who never should have built a game in the first place. And I think, so I think it comes great teams will leverage it in the right way to build really great things. But there will also be like a growing need for better curation.
For sure. I mean, that truism goes all the way back until the 80s, when ET cratered the video game market, because even without all of these third-party tools, the wrong people were building the wrong games and flooding the market with it, until Nintendo came along like the white knight that it was and single-handedly resurrected the Western video game industry. But I think, to your point, what that speaks to is a need for curation more than anything. Anybody and everybody should be able to be a painter, and they are, or an author, and they are. But I don't think anybody is worried about bad authors cratering the literature market, because we just have the ability to curate literature nailed down, where those people sink to the bottom and the good ones rise to the top. And I think if you look at like what Steam and Valve's strategy is over the next like 10 or 15 years, like I think what they want to be doing is enabling curators more so than they're simply just enabling distribution. And I think they're thinking about that problem as, I don't know if you guys know the stats, but like how many games release on a monthly basis now versus 15 years ago? Like, are we not in the middle of that epidemic of 7,000 games a month 100%. For whatever it is being released? And somehow Alex and I managed to find Helldivers together, and we managed to find these great games that rise to the top of this list. I think that's more of a curation problem than a democratization problem.
True. I know we're almost at time, but I really want to ask this question just for like my own clarity. How does game frame differ from something like Lyra?
In terms of Lyra being a sample and a demonstration of where Epic and Unreal want to take kind of the standardization for system design and architecture, our systems take certainly a lot of inspiration from that. Our weapon controller, our camera controller takes a lot of inspiration from that because we think that Epic is on the right path in terms of where they want developers to go. But it extends that out to be an out-of-the-box solution combined with and integrated with every other system that you would need to turn Lyra into a go-to-market ready product. And it's just a matter of configuring those systems and customizing them to fit your needs. But I think at the end of the day, Lyra is just a really great example and reference and inspiration of how you should build weapon and camera and locomotion systems. But it is not a go-to-market ready system complete with everything else that you would need to launch a game and welcome players into your environment.
Cool. That just about wraps it up. This has been really interesting, Ryan. We've talked a ton about like the rise of AA, and we also talked about like standardization as like taking real steps towards I mean, call it whatever you want, but a world where the gamer has a lot of potential to like benefit from a more seamless experience, let's say. Yeah, man, really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure. The content of this video is intended for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. The views shared by Alex and I are our own, and we may hold investments in some of the companies or digital assets featured in the video.